Salatu wassalamu ala rasulillah. So my name is Sheikh Yusuf Rios. I'm with Respect Graduate School. I just came on with them as a resident scholar and project director. And I'm one of the founders of the Three Puerto Rican Imams Project, which is a relief social service project headed by Imams. And we do work with communities across the world. We put a lot of focus on Latin America and the Caribbean because those are underserved communities. But we also do work in Palestine and Pakistan and some of the African countries, and a lot of local work. So I kind of bring an academic, clinical type of orientation and activism all together. That's kind of a little bit about me. I'm originally from the East Coast, but half of my life I was in the Midwest, and I just came back to the East Coast within the past year and a half or so. I'm originally a convert to Islam as well, so I've been Muslim for over 20 years now, and I come from that experience, and I've lived in Egypt for like 5 years, so I've been overseas, kind of a mix of two worlds. And my parents, they came here from Puerto Rico, so I get that first generation immigrant experience where also grow up here and come from a Latino background, so understand American culture through that lens. There's more to say, but it's not, I don't think it's too relevant. I just wanted to give you somewhat of an orientation. I will say though that after studying Islam formally for a number of years, when I came back, I realized that where we were at in studying Islam and where the community was at was two different playing fields. And part of my getting involved with the whole idea of Islamic counseling, if you want to call that part of mental health or the helping profession, you can. Although, officially Islamic psychology and Islamic counseling is something that's very new in this country. So the whole formalization process is not completely there. But I got into that because of the needs of the community. And I began to realize that a lot of people go through their struggles, and we put those struggles into a certain filtering system. And most of the time what we do is either halal, haram, or is like go make dua or do ruqya in order to deal with the struggles that people have on a spiritual and emotional level. So that became something, that was a driving force to orient myself more on how do we address the struggles of people that may not necessarily be a crisis of iman. Sometimes when people go through struggles, they have to do with their, what we call mental health, then we automatically attribute that to a crisis of iman, or we say your iman is not strong enough. That's not necessarily the case, right? That's not necessarily the case. So there's a need for having this type of dialogue. But before going further, I want to ask, what do you all think the relationship between Islam and mental health is? Who can give me some, just a brief consideration, a reflection, anything that you think?
I think there's a strong correlation between the two.
In what way?
I feel like depending on how good someone's iman is, like it has a very positive effect if you're abiding by the laws of Islam. But there, I know there's a lot of Muslims who don't, and they tell me, oh, my mental health is this and that, but they blame it on external factors when it could be like brother or sister. You're not even praying 5 times a day. Like, how do you expect your Lord to help you? Like, if you're not performing salah, I feel like that, like, Islam has a really good limitation on your mental health is much more beyond that we could comprehend.
I agree with you on that point, that it has a positive impact or has I would rather say a beneficial impact. The only problematic issue there is that if someone is struggling, then you're accusing them of having weak faith. When that may not be the case. They can actually have a life crisis issue, which does pertain to the external circumstances. It can be genetic as well. You know what I'm saying? And so then we get into a situation where we're blaming someone or we're making them feel guilty because they're going through a crisis. You get what I'm saying?
Yeah.
It's not a personal attack on you, but it's just an issue. I think that we have to develop that. If we're going to get beyond the whole idea of, well, there's a jinn involved in this, or there's magic, that has impacted you, to something that's more, scientific, or something that is more in tune with where people's needs are, then we're also going to have to understand that there's an interaction between the individual, other people, and the outside world. It just can't be that we solve everything internally. Right? And that's very popular now because of Jordan Peterson and the conservative push in this country to just blame the individual. To just say, well, just focus on, become a better person and everything fall in place. Well, bad things happen to good people, so to speak. So yes, we can agree with you at a core level. There's benefit that comes from securing your well-being through religious practice. But then at the same time, it's not necessarily the case that if someone is struggling with their mental, spiritual health, is due to weakness of Imaam. Does anybody else, sisters, have any ideas or thoughts?
I say you could say that there's a correlation, because if you're like feeling down or something, there's ayahs in the Quran that help you understand what you're feeling. There's also du'as for you to say.
Mm-hmm.
So Islam could help you with your mental health. Not saying it could affect your mental health positively, but you could also have external problems not related to it.
Can you clarify the second part about the external?
So let's say you're like having a bad day, and people are like, oh, maybe you should go pray then. But sometimes it's not always about your prayer connection with God, just you're having a bad day. If that makes sense.
Yeah, that kind of, you two complement each other, in what you say. He gave a general position about the benefits of the practice of the deen, and then you're saying specifically we can turn to certain ayat of the Quran for helping us navigate, but it's not necessarily the case that what we're struggling with has something to do with me because of what I failed to do or something on a personal level. Could be I'm just going through a hard time. Anybody else? Anybody else before we move on?
I feel like hardships that we go through in this dunya today, in today's day and age, isn't something unknown from what our prophets and our, people in the past been through. So knowing the history of Islam, knowing what our prophets went through and how they overcame those problems, we can, help ourselves through that too.
Yeah, that's like it complements what has been said, but what you're saying is used heavily in something that's called Islamic trauma therapy, which is not very popular. Islamic trauma therapy was developed. It was a collaboration between people in the Somali community in Seattle and some university professors that did data collection, and they were applying trauma therapy to that community. But they found that it was not enough to just talk about trauma. The issues that you all are talking about, how we navigate the trauma with our religion, was a missing piece. So the community, and specific a sister called Dunya Lang, she added an Islamic component as far as Islamic resource, and she began to draw on the lives of the prophets and specific du'a, along with being informed of how trauma impacts us. And then they developed a whole concept of how do we deal with trauma by an Islamic framework. And so part of it was looking at the suffering, right? Because trauma many times has to do with suffering, or the struggles, that people live through that we consider to be role models like the prophets. And what type of dua did they make in different situations? What were those stories like, and how do we find in those stories compatibility? Because you have serious trauma in the Muslim community. Not every situation is a traumatic situation. A traumatic situation is that something disruptive can happen, and then it causes you not to be able to function, right? It becomes disruptive to you. But we have natural disasters, we have political disasters, we have, situations that happen in people's family lives. All of those can open up to trauma, but not everybody, because they go through hardship, is gonna be considered to be traumatized. It's only if it disrupts your life. You know what I'm saying? And some people, they're able to manage. So let's look at some of the issues that we confront. We're going to talk a few minutes about some problems that we confront as Muslims in today's time when it comes to the issue of Islam and mental health. Right? The first thing that we confront is overcoming the issue that we talked about. Do we have something that is called mental health, or do we attribute it to jinn and magic? Or do we just make dua? We have that problem in the Muslim community where we won't acknowledge mental health, right? And we attribute it to other forces, weak iman or moral failure, or we attribute it to the unseen only, and that's it. Whereas people can be really going through struggles. The other issue that we confront that's serious is that defining mental health is a challenge in the contemporary age. Part of that challenge is that the profession itself that deals with human behavior, which you can divide it into the psychiatric profession and the psychological profession, they don't have a clear definition of what mental health is. So in order to understand mental health, we have to deal with the problem of mental illness. There's no clear definition. And most of the definitions that are out there are really legal definitions. So for instance, and we'll cover that, we'll come to it really briefly, Dr. Shalaby, who was a psychiatrist, he talks about how in the previous DSM, the volume 4, which is the diagnostic manual that's used to diagnose disorders, there was no definition for mental illness. And the World Health Organization, they have classification for diseases. They had no definition for mental illness. So if there's no definition for mental illness, how do we understand mental health? If there's no solid definition, you get what I'm saying? So the definitions that were created came from some sort of understanding of the legal system. Why? Because when we start talking about the mental health industry, when we start talking about mental health practice, what's the first thing that comes to your mind? Mental illness, but what else? What's associated with that? Therapy, what else?
Just psychologists.
Psychologists, and what else?
Depression.
Yeah, depression, these are, but what else more?
Medication.
Medication, people scared of medication. What else?
Cost, I guess, like the economic status.
Economic status. But what else? I'm looking for something more specific than that. What happens if someone is labeled as having, mental health issues?
Stigma.
The stigma,
Insane.
and then what's the insanity associated with in the past?
The law where like you would be sent to the
A psychiatric hospital. So when you're sent to a psychiatric hospital, what happens is that your volition, your will, your choice is taken from you. Your freedom is taken from you. You have to have some justification for that. for why you can take and you can arrest someone and put them into this type of environment, right? And the history of mental health in the West is terrible. If you go back to the Middle Ages, they used to drill things in people's heads. You know, the history, there's a big stigma about mental health because of the way that it was dealt with in the West. And up to now, we still have a stigma. We still have a stigma around mental health. You can say that I have cancer. You can say that I have the flu. You can say that I have a kidney problem. You can say that you're sick. But if you were to say I'm having a mental health day, you know what I'm saying? Or if you were to say that I'm extremely depressed or I'm struggling with voices or whatever it may be, you know, that I'm struggling emotionally, then somehow or some way, you know, you're marginalized. And that stigma still exists, even though we have all this awareness and so on and so forth. Right? So one of the definitions that was generated, and Dr. Shelley, he brings this up, is that it's mental illness is a severe disturbance in thinking, mood, perception, memory, or cognition. This is a medical legal definition. Why? Because you have to talk about people and when is it that they can be imposed upon. So we have to have some definition that's legal, right? That allows some intervention to come into place. The same thing with billing, right? The same thing with billing comes up. How do you bill? Can you bill for someone having a mental health crisis and they need 40 hours of therapy? How do you pay for someone needing medicine? And what's the justification for that, right? So as Muslims, in reality, we haven't dealt with these issues. As Muslims, we have not dealt with these issues. These are very modern issues, right? Although as Muslims, we have experience. Historically, Muslims were very involved in mental health. But somewhere along the line, when Islamic civilization declines, you begin to see that we're supplanting the superstitious idea for dealing with the human condition. Prior to, you can go back in history, you can see they were dealing with psychological states. They were dealing with chemical changes in the body that may disrupt mental health. They were dealing with ideation that may be disruptive, whether it's obsessive thoughts or thoughts that are not helping a person and leads them to depression. They were dealing with that type of thing. And we have some writings that show that they were very advanced on that. Very, much so that they give us some framework to show that Muslims were dealing with mental health, especially things that, in such a way that they deal with like cognitive behavior therapy, which is, CBT is very dominant now in dealing with depression. You know what I'm saying? Very dominant with dealing with depression and other struggles that people have. But so the definition that is here, is a definition that was generated, and you can find it in legal systems, right? It has something to do with disrupting your judgment, your behavior, your sense of reality, your sense of being able to deal with life. And in that, the opposite of that will be mental health. Someone in a good mental state. That they have a good sense of judgment, that their behavior is not something that's disruptive to them or harmful to others, that they have a sense of reality. Not thinking that right now, like as I'm looking at you, your eyes are reading into my head and you can understand what's going on, and you're out to get me, you're plotting on me. That's like a sense of a break in reality. So a person that doesn't have that type of ideation, or that knows that this is 2022, we're on the campus of Keene University, we're not in a spaceship. You see what I'm saying? They can relate to reality. And a person that can face ordinary life demands. We can be down and depressed, we can struggle, but it's not so disruptive that it takes us out of life on the everyday basis. We can have our moments, but we can still function, right? So that's a general definition of mental health. And Islamically, we have there's no issue with that. You know, but someone could be struggling. Any of these areas can be, they can be hitting. I know someone that was telling me they were in Afghanistan, and they were there when they were, when the war was at its height in recent times, and their mind just is there. They're here in the U.S., but their mind travels there, and it's very overwhelming, and everything is filtered to that experience. So now their sense of reality becomes a little blurred, right? And it starts looking like there's trauma and there's distress, and it disrupts their ability to function. See what I mean? So we have that type of experience as an ummah, that we have these types of situations that are going on that can be extremely problematic, and they can disrupt us. So we shouldn't be scared to say that there is such a thing as mental illness, and there's also the idea of mental health. The criteria that we use to something that disturbs us, that's very disturbing, and it impairs us in our thinking, in our emotion, in our behavior, could be anything. Sometimes a relationship change can be that. Someone can die in our family, or there could be a breakup. We can have a loving relationship with someone and just completely, disrupts our life. So are we good to at this point to kind of get like a general understanding of some criteria for what mental health is and what mental health illness is? Right. So now, as I mentioned before, Shalaby's thesis, Dr. Shalaby, he wrote a book on forensic psychiatry and Islamic jurisprudence. He's a psychiatrist. And he makes that claim that, look, the definition for mental illness is a loose definition. And we mentioned what we see is a legal definition that's out there. Why is that important? Because nowadays everybody has it in their mind. This person is bipolar. This person has mental issue. We throw around the terms like there's no issue. Someone may have an issue with life, and automatically we're labeling them. And that label is what stops us from what? Talking, seeking help, seeking support. You know what I'm saying? And Shalaby, he makes the claim that, look, even in the psychological literature, they struggle with defining what mental illness is. Because if you don't know what mental illness is, how can you define what mental health is? Right? Although we're talking about it all the time. And that's a value for us as Muslims, because as Muslims, we have an understanding of the human being. That's important. Right? And I already mentioned that the previous DSM, the Diagnostic Manual for the Psychiatrists and Psychologists, the edition 4 didn't even have a definition for mental illness. Neither did the World Health Organization. So we have to be very careful when we're labeling people, because the label sticks, and it can be harmful to them psychologically, and also when we're pushing for people to get labeled, it can affect them. Why? Because it's a legal definition. That's why some Muslims are scared. Like I had a Muslim family that I was counseling. The son had issues with reality. He thought he was the Mahdi. And you could tell where he was going was not to a good place mentally. And I told him, I said, he's at a point where counseling is not going to help him. He needs a direct intervention. He needs some psychiatric help. And it ended up being the case that he became homicidal. He threatened to kill the family. But they were so scared to report it and get help because of the label. See what I'm saying? Yes, we have to be cautious about the label, but we have to know when it's out of our hands. It's not against Islam to seek out that type of help, right? But then that's where we have to inform ourselves as Muslims on what is the best way to navigate the mental health system. You see what I'm saying? We have to become advocates for ourselves and for our community, and especially those that are college educated. We have to know how to be able to dialogue with this situation. we have to be able to know what's the best path to take when we're looking for care. So Chazaz, he has a thesis. Thomas Chazaz, he has a thesis which is used by the father of modern Islamic psychology, which is Dr. Malik Bedri. He died recently, rahmatullahi alayhi. And he has an article, I advise you to read it. It's called The Dilemma of Muslim Psychologists, in which he talks about some of the challenges that Muslim psychologists face when they're dealing with these issues. And if Muslim psychologists are facing some challenges, then what about us who we may be looking to them for help or to the industry for help?
Wait, what's it called again? Dilemma of
The Dilemma of Muslim Psychology. You can find it online, you have to search for it. But he quotes Chazaz, and Chazaz is very critical because he's looking at Western thought and he's asking, when is it that mental illness comes to the fore? He wrote the article, The Myth of Mental Illness. And before they used to call mental illness syphilis of the brain. So it has something to do with the biology of the brain, not necessarily the mind. Right? It was focused on the genetic side of things. So he came up, with a critical assessment. He said that, look, there's some people, they have the assumption that some neurological defect will ultimately be found for every disorder of thinking. And that's not necessarily the case. That's an assumption. See what I'm saying? I had a teacher when I was I was studying to be a priest at one time. And I had a teacher who, he was into neurology. And he actually left being a Catholic priest because everything that he was studying in neurology disproved his religious belief. Everything had a chemical component, even love. Can you imagine if you think that everything has a chemical component, that's the cause of it. That's not to say that things don't have a chemical component in our bodies, because we're, in the Islamic terms, we're spiritual beings and physical beings. We're an amalgamation of the two, right? When we get happy, of course, we know that happiness is going to release endorphins or whatever it may be, right? We know that certain depressed states will release certain chemicals, or there's a deficient of other chemicals. We know that. But is that all of it? That's the challenge that we have. That where the field is at, the field doesn't consider the soul. The field doesn't consider the spirit. Now it's changing. Now it's beginning to change. You get what I'm saying? That's why many religious people in the past, they were suspect of where contemporary psychiatry is at and psychology is at. So we as Muslims have to know that that's a school of thought. But there's also a school of thought within these disciplines, within these fields, within these practices that opens up to religious practice. And even if we don't find a Muslim, we can find someone that has that orientation, a spiritual orientation, to help us in situations where counseling is just not going to work. See what I'm saying? There's people that are psychiatrists that they incline towards holistic tendencies. There's people like Gabor Mate who deals a lot with psychiatry and mental health issues now. He's a doctor. And there's people like Bessel Koch, who's one of the top researchers and practitioners that dealing with trauma. That they talk about one of the things that causes what we call mental illness is just a breakdown in society. That's not to say that's the only thing, because there's genetic factors as well at times. But the breakdown in society. So they say one of the things that creates a lot of the problems that we struggle with, not every problem, of course, it's just an absence of social support and loving relationships. Think about depression and suicidal ideation as two issues that become very dominant, that are classified within mental health. A lot of times if people are depressed, there's a disconnect, very serious disconnect between themselves and the support system. And if it gets bad, then it's going to be something that may even need chemical intervention, needing drugs, you know what I'm saying, in order to deal with it. Because those states become very toxic And when the brain is exposed to depression over a long period of time and it becomes severe, then the body is in a bad place. But they say that a lot of these things have to do with the fact of the breakdown of society. It's not just where we were going. It's not just the individual failure. That could be the case, right? It could be the case at one point in time that a person made certain decisions, right? Certain moral failings, and it opened up that door. But it's not always the case, you know what I'm saying, that someone falls into mental illness and it's because of weakness of Iman, that type of thing. But it could be the case that the way that, like for instance, it was mentioned over here that when someone is having difficulty with life, it both actually, one person mentioned, you mentioned the issue of turning to the Quran specific ayat, and you turn to the idea of models, the prophets and so on and so forth. But it could be the case that, for instance, for a person, they're using these techniques and the support is not there, and they find themselves out of desperation making bad decisions, maybe using drugs, maybe hanging out with the wrong crowd, and then that becomes a point of addiction. That becomes a point where other things are opened up. Now they may be with the bad crowd, and in order to fit in and feel support, they may make the decision to use drugs and use drugs more and more, and then now they find themselves in a state where they need some sort of intervention because the drugs may have messed them up, may have altered their perception of reality. So you see that we can't, as Muslims, disconnect the community, spirituality, right? Responsibility. We can't disconnect those things from what? From our emotional and spiritual well-being. We need the support group in order to have a good mental health state. You know what I mean? We need loving relationships, right? We also need encouragement when we're going through life difficulties, right? So that our iman gets strong and we're able to protect ourselves from some things. If not, we open ourselves up to situations of vulnerability. So he argues that, someone is making the claim of illness, then they're also making the claim of there's a norm. And illness is a deviation from that norm, right? So if you're living in a society in which alcohol is the norm, you see what I'm saying? And people are exposing them to, or now marijuana is the norm, CBD is the norm, you know what I'm saying? Whatever form it comes in is the norm. Then you may, as a Muslim, have a problem with that. You may even see it as an issue that someone is intoxicating themselves and then they fall into depressed states. But is that group going to see that as an illness or as a problem? Why not?
Because it's their norm.
Is there no? So there's certain things that are classified as problems, right, by certain people, and they could be professionals, that we may challenge them on. That's where we as Muslims, we go into dialogue with, the profession itself. In other words, it's not necessarily the case that the psychiatrist or the psychologist is unbiased. That's the critique that we have. But it's not the case also that just because we may find some bias in the field, or we may find some problems in the field, that we just jettison it, or we just say no. You see what I'm saying? We're not going to deal with it. What we need is more people that are Muslim, that are grounded, that understand Islam, to go into the field. You see what I'm saying? And add our values to the dimension, to that field, to that study. One thing that we look at when we look at Maslow's hierarchy of needs, we see in Maslow's hierarchy of needs, how many of you have studied this at all or come across it? It's pretty popular. It's used in social services. It's used in leadership training. It's used in the intelligence agencies. Right? It's used in child psychology. It's used in education. It's used all over the place. But if you look at this reality, the idea of self-actualization is at the top. That's the peak where you want to be at. This assumes the universality of human nature. There's an assumption there that all humans are operating on this. And so the most fundamental needs are physical needs. And then after these basic needs, like eating and drinking and so on and so forth, for what you need for your biological survival, at the basic level, then there's things like security and safety, which still has to do with your biological survival in many ways, right? Then after that is your emotional state, having relationships with people, right? And then having them treat you okay, recognizing the good in you. Then we start talking about the idea of self-actualization. You know, of going to other levels of developing your talents and so on and so forth. What's missing?
Spirituality.
Where's Iman in this? See what I'm saying? What else is missing here at this level? This starts with what? Does it start with the group or does it start with the individual? Yeah, no, it starts with the individual. The group comes in where?
Belonging and love needs.
Yes, it comes up here. So, okay, let me ask you a question. So if you're poor and you're struggling with housing and food, what do you think your state of being is going to be? You don't know if your electricity is going to be on. You have shut off notices. You don't know if you're going to have a home.
Depends on your man.
That would be the Muslim.
It would be stressful. A lot of psychological stress.
Yeah, you can have Iman, but you can have a lot of. If you have a lot of psychological state, how many of you are like psychology students or sociology? So where do you think the brain is at that point? Because now this is where the study is at, mostly study on the brain. Psychological studies focus a lot on the brain.
Oh, you're asking me?
Yeah.
I would say like in a very depressed state.
Could be very depressed state, but that okay. So we say people respond to crisis situations and what? They freeze.
They seclude themselves.
They freeze,
Freeze or
flight,
fight.
or fight. Right. So what you're saying is what? How would we categorize it? He's saying they go to depressive. That would be like freezing, right? So okay, either way, that's a survival mode. This is survival. I'm in between. Okay, for instance, right now it's a little warm, but I may be stuck in the wintertime below 0 temperature trying to figure out where I'm going to get shelter. And I may not be alone here. I may have to have shelter for my children. Like this what happened in Turkey, in Syria recently with the earthquake. That they're not only dealing with the earthquake and life or death under, how do we deal with the rubble on us? Now the temperatures are temperatures that are low temperatures. So it's also, we can freeze to death. See what I'm saying? So, but this doesn't allow you to be in the most productive mindset. So if you're staying here at this level, relationships that are torn apart, friends that you can't trust, you have issues with, you live in a neighborhood that is not safe. Every time you turn around, you're watching your back, or you walk by someone, you can't stare them in the eye. That's the East Coast culture. Don't stare at anybody. So we live in that type of state. So this is not necessarily going to be in the, if we're in these categories, if this is if we're in these categories struggling, we're going to have a hard time with life. So of course, it's easy to be depressed. You may have all of these needs met, you may have a sense of security and not feel loved. So from the angle of when we talk about Islam and mental health, immediately what you did, we're talking about infusing this reality. Okay, we can use this schema, we can use this outline. But when we talk about mental health, we're also questioning, what is the role of my Iman in this? And it's not only me as an individual, it's like us as a community. Like for instance, Iman dictates that we take care of each other. This is why there's zakat here. This is why there's sadaqah here. You see what I'm saying? This is why there's economic justice. We're not just thinking that these needs can be met in a way where the individual just struggles by themselves. We believe in collective well-being. That's part of what we talked about here, how Iman benefits or how faith benefits our psychological well-being. Right? Our faith dictates to us that this is not the only thing that we should be living for. See what I'm saying? It's not just paying the bills and getting the nice car and getting the shelter. All of that is physical needs. It's not also just about doing those things to maintain the family. Family is a good support. But where is the dimension of where our relationship is with Allah? See what I'm saying? So that's the struggle that we have, when we're dealing with mental health issues. You know what I'm saying? The struggle that we have is that we have to learn how to study the impact of society on us and how it impacts us emotionally and mentally, right? Where is it that we may be struggling with genetics? See what I'm saying? And then how do we infuse faith in dealing with these issues? And not only in dealing with these issues, how do we understand ourselves? Because we as Muslims, we understand ourselves as a collective, not just as individuals. We also don't understand ourselves just as a collective. We also respect individuality. You get what I'm saying? So relationships is important. And when we talk about some definitions of mental health, they're talking about a breakdown in people's ability to relate to other people. One of the first things that you find that school is all about is what? Is it about just education or book knowledge, or what is it about? Huh? Experiences, but socialization. Yeah? From an early age, education is many ways about socialization. And socialization at a deeper level is not only about social control, but what else is it about? Why is there so much fear of homeschooling? Yeah, people claim that the social development is lost, right? So what are we talking about? Give me something tangible, because we're still under the very abstract.
I guess a good example could be like the fact that a lot of people had to switch to being online during the pandemic.
The pandemic did a lot of damage. Up to now, it has damage is there psychologically. We all went into a state of shock. We were like in a solitary confinement. If you do prison studies, you see what the impact of solitary confinement is. But socialization teaches us to be more practical, how to navigate our emotions with people. How do you deal with people giving jokes telling jokes about you that may be offensive? Do you always take it personal, or sometimes can you laugh it off? See what I'm saying? How do you deal with people that are mean and bullying? See what I'm saying? Do you internalize that abuse? You know what I'm saying? Or do you work through it? You see what I'm saying? So when we look at Islam and mental health, we have to consider the group, our relationship to the group, and our well-being is not just physical and emotional well-being as Muslims. It's spiritual well-being as well. Right? That's the peak. The peak experience for us as Muslims is that we're aiming to find the pleasure of Allah. We're aiming to find meaning. We're aiming to not only find meaning at the personal level, but at the interpersonal level, right? And so here we find Dr. Malik Bedri, he brings up some points. He says in his article, this is from the article, The Dilemma of the Muslim Psychologist, right? He's going way back. He's talking about personality, theories of personality. This is an area in psychology. He's basically saying, look, attempt to forge a systematic understanding of human personality and behavior didn't begin with Western psychology. Western psychology doesn't have the monopoly, you see what I'm saying, on this issue. They have insights. There's deep insights. Like, for instance, the study that was done on the TED Talk, there's a TED Talk on a study, I think it's like 75 years or something like that, where people were studied with regard to human happiness. That's something that's awesome. See what I'm saying? That's a study of people, different types of people with different personalities, and how it is that they understand life and happiness. That type of study was not known in the past in that way. That amount of time to study people as they grow and they develop, we get that in the modern age, we get those types of studies. But we also get studies in the modern age that classify groups and dehumanize them. You see what I'm saying? We also had studies, you know what I'm saying, that justified people being unethically treated, marginalized from society. That's sometimes what you see, within the history of psychiatry and psychology. So he says the theories of personality discussed in this book are the product of European and American culture and only one set of innumerable psychologies that people in many times and places articulate. While the psychologies in some cultures and time periods, the epochs, have been at best loose collections of folk wisdom. That's the problem of how mental health was being dealt with in the past. How was it being dealt with? It wasn't being dealt with systematically. And that's Western psychology attempts to take the study of the human being and make it an actual science. That's where we as Muslims, we've fallen off. Right? That's why we need people to go more into the discipline, right? And to develop it and bring our values as Muslims. We've fallen off in the scientific studies for us. So at the end of the day, where much of the discipline is at is in empirical